My name's Emily Carlson, and I'm really happy to be joining you all for our second lecture series. Tonight, we have a very exciting speaker. I am thrilled to introduce Susie Peterson. Susie has been co-managing the Backyard Habitat Certification Program with the Columbia Land Trust since 2016. Her work aligns with her desire to deepen her focus on creating and supporting native plants and all of their wildlife counterparts. She's co-hosted Mason bee workshops and works daily to shine a light on the intersections of ecosystem and human health. So our presentation today is going to go over the elements of the Backyard Habitat Program, and all the ways all of which support bees and other pollinators, along with many free and low-cost ways to create bee habitat in your yard. So without any further ado, take it away, Susie.
All right. Thank you so much, Emily. I really appreciate being invited. I love talking to fans of pollinators. Pollinators is a topic that I'm very passionate about. So it was fun to take some of our standard presentations and really incorporate a lot more like pollinator specific things for this crowd. And let's see, I'll go ahead and start sharing my screen. And let me know, ideally right now you're seeing my slideshow versus like my whole desktop setup with all my windows and everything. So Emily kind of gave the rundown. Emily, I hope it's okay. I tweaked it a little bit today, just trying to keep the crowd in mind. I was kind of guessing that there'd be folks here who already had a fair amount of knowledge. As opposed to some of the other presentations we give that are more like broad and about the program. And I also wasn't sure how many folks here were from the area that we serve versus maybe outside of that. So kind of a condensed bit about the program, about the Backyard Habitat Program, and then kind of focusing a little bit more on actually building pollinator habitat and wildlife habitat. So the program that I manage and really co-manage it, has a mission to provide tools, resources, and recognition for gardening sustainably and creating wildlife habitat. And the program has been around really since 2006, when it was just a little itty bitty pilot program, and it's really blossomed since then. We have 14,000 folks in the program now, which is so exciting and really making an impact for creating corridors, wildlife corridors throughout the 4-county region that we work in. The program is co-managed by the organization I work for, which is Columbia Land Trust, as well as Bird Alliance of Oregon. And so a few slides about how the program works in case anyone here happens to be in our service area, which is Washington County, Multnomah County, Clackamas County, and Clark County. And if you're not in it, basically folks sign up. We have a small one-time cost that's sliding scale because we don't want cost to be a barrier. So once you sign up, we assign you with a habitat technician who schedules a time to come out and do a 1-hour site visit. And during that site visit, we really try to provide a lot of resources for the participant to get started right away on habitat projects. So we have coupons, for example, to 19 local nurseries that we partner with so that folks can get discounted native plants. And we have a resource packet that's full of all sorts of handouts and things to help folks get started. We also provide a sign so that folks can put that up and know that their neighbors have an idea of like why their landscaping might look like in progress for a little while. And then afterwards, we follow up with a site report that details the existing aspects of the site, as well as what we're recommending in order to create habitat. And then we do a lot of follow-up support, follow-up phone calls. We can do follow-up consultations. And then once the participant is ready for certification, they're kind of met some of the things that we laid out in the site report. We send out a volunteer. We have about 80 volunteers, 30 of whom go out and provide the certification visits. And so we have a really great volunteer program as well. And then at certification, folks receive recognition and some benefits, and that certification is good for about 3 years. And there are 6 main things we talk about in our program, and all of these are really overlapping and impact each other. So planting locally native plants, supporting wildlife, stormwater management, managing plants that we recommend removing, committing to using integrated pest management and reducing or eliminating the use of pesticides and herbicides, as well as education and volunteerism. And then in the program, folks can usually start out with the lowest certification level, which is silver. That requires a handful of items, such as planting 5% of the yard with native plants and removing the weeds on our silver weed list. That includes like ivy, blackberry, some of those more aggressive types. Doing 1 stormwater management habitat project. There's some that are hard, some that are easier, as well as a wildlife stewardship project, and not using any red zone herbicides or pesticides, which are the most dangerous, like the least healthy ones. And then from there, you can work your way on up to gold, or if you're really ambitious, platinum. And some of the reasons that we really are focused on this is that we have a lot of wildlife that utilize this region. We're very abundant. This region has so much abundance. We have a lot of water. We have a lot of trees. We have a lot of different kind of micro niche habitats. So 367 species of animals call our region home, which is amazing. And then we have 219 additional bird species that migrate through, just kind of passing through, really using this area as a stop to refuel as they keep going, heading up north on the Pacific Flyway. And we have over 500 bee species. And I don't think anyone actually feels confident saying this is exactly how many bee species, because to my understanding, we feel like there are more out there that haven't been identified yet. And some sad stats that kind of bring us to some of our motivations for doing this is that 25% of our common bird species are in decline. And about 30 species of native bees are labeled as possibly extinct or critically imperiled. And so what we really focus on is, what can we do? What can we as individuals? What can we do as individuals? What can we do as community? What can we do as a larger collective? And so there's some big picture things we can do. We can work on really advocating for policies so that development doesn't grow too rampant, so that we can find that balance between development and leaving habitat that's critical, especially for endangered species like frogs and salamanders, as well as climate change advocacy. There's some introduced species that we can help manage, and other human hazards that are on that like big picture scale. And then there's a lot we can do in our yards, and this is what our program focuses on. There are things we can do that we'll be going over here shortly. And I'm going to use the term in our yards, but just know that we don't consider this to like stop in folks' front yard or backyard. We really think of this as like, where in your life do you have touch points to land that needs care? Maybe it's at the school that your kids go to, Maybe you go to a church where there's some extra land that could be tended, or maybe a local community garden. So that's what we're going to focus on, how you can help in your own backyard or front yard. So this is a slide that I modified. It's usually called Think Like a Bird, because most of the folks who come into the program really want to see more birds in their yard. That's what kind of initially draws them in. So it was fun to cater this to bee lovers, folks who are really thinking about bees. Over here on the left, so this slide is basically like, if you were a bee, where would you want to hang out for a day? Where would you go to look for food, for shelter? And so over here on the left, we've got homes with mostly yard, a few smaller shrubs, maybe a large tree. And then over here on the right are the types of images that we're really supporting people in creating, where there's a lot of different plants, a real diversity of plants that can provide food and shelter, access to water, very important for pollinators and others, pollinators and all wildlife, especially on those hot days, and lots of canopy layers. Canopy layers benefit birds and they benefit pollinators too, as well as some simple things like open soil, leaving some soil open for all the ground nesters that we have. So the way we kind of approach it is like looking normally not just at a single species, although it's really beneficial and fun to do that at times as well, but kind of like overall food web, like overall ecosystem health. And so things we know, or things we think we know, things we currently know, are that native plants do have a strong correlation and have co-evolved with our pollinators and other beneficial insects. And those two really are the foundation of the food web. So if you want to take a step back even further than that, you've really got healthy soil. Healthy soil is kind of the starter. And then you've got native plants and a lot of other plants that are beneficial to pollinators and wildlife. And then you've got your pollinators, your insect population on up the food chain. And so we really talk a lot about insects in the program because insects get a bad rap, but they're a critical part of our ecosystem. And of course, pollinators are part of that. So a few ways that insects interact with the other aspects of the food web. 96% of land birds feed on insects, and a large portion of those feed only insects to their young. So when an adult bird is feeding a baby bird food while it's getting ready to fledge, they are almost exclusively looking for insects to feed them. So bees and other pollinators included. So without insects, we don't have birds that mature into adults. And then 10% of small mammals only eat insects. So these would be like our voles, our moles, and our other very important small mammals. 100% of adult amphibians and most reptiles eat a combination of insects, small mammals, and fish. That's another population that's very critical for needing insects. So insects are really critical to healthy ecosystems. And then as we learn more and more every day, we're all connected through the food web. And so insect health, including pollinators, is really important for our food production and every aspect of our life, everything we need to stay healthy. So I'm going to turn the light here for a second to focus on native plants. And this is a good point to just kind of lay a foundation for how I'm going to be talking about native plants tonight, because there is a common misperception that in our program we're pretty black and white about native plants, like only native plants are good, no other plants are good. And I just want to like squash that right now because that's definitely not how we think about it. It's not how I think about it. And we try not to talk about it that way. But so because what we know is that a lot of pollinators, a lot of bird species do heavily rely on native plants and do prefer native plants. But we also know that a lot of pollinators and birds and other wildlife utilize a ton of non-native plants, including some plants that are considered invasive. And so we're really much more about looking at a plant and thinking about why a given plant should be respected, what benefits it brings, versus damning a plant or putting it in a bad light, because most plants do have value. But with that said, we do really feel like it's critical to maintain a really healthy native plant population, which is why we are focusing on that. Both for pollinators, but also just for the sake of these plants surviving into the future. A lot of our native plant species have been really hindered by development and pesticides and herbicides, just like our wildlife and pollinators have been hit. So they deserve that acknowledgement in and of themselves as well. Okay, so next, let's talk about native plants and what we mean when we talk about that in our program, in my program. So the term native plant, I mean, I feel like I'm preaching to the choir here. You all probably know this, but can mean a lot of different things. It can mean like native to North America, or native to the West Coast, native to the state of Oregon. Because we are lucky enough to have a resource like the Portland Plant List, which was created by the city of Portland to reflect, or they basically did a ton of research to determine what native plants were here pre-colonization, before a lot of plants from Europe, from Asia started being brought over, what was here and in what quantity, and how did they live together. So if you haven't already taken a look at the Portland Plant List, I highly recommend it. It's full of information, lots of information about what native plants grew together, just so much good stuff in there. And so that's the document that's the plant list we lean on. I get a lot of calls from folks across the country who want to start a habitat program, and they don't have a plant list. So they don't even have a native plant list. So we're really fortunate here. Okay, so back to kind of that point of native plants being beneficial as well as non-native plants. I love that OSU had a group that did this really amazing research to see which plants pollinators loved. I'm guessing you all have seen this, so I'm not going to take a long time talking about it, but this is basically the kind of like top 10 picks by pollinator species. And so these are going to be your most bang for the buck for native plants. Xerces Society, who it sounds like you'll be hearing from shortly, also has a really great list of native plants, as well as bloom time, which is really important to know about, and what their sun and soil conditions are, and what type of pollinators benefit from them. So definitely check that one out if you don't already know about that. This is where we start getting into what we call best bang for your buck. We talk about this a lot because a lot of folks don't have a ton of money to spend on plants. And so you're looking for like, okay, I want to benefit the most pollinators, the most bird species. What are the top plants for doing that? And this really lists them out. So we've got vine maple, Pacific dogwood, chokecherry, Oregon white oak. Under the shrub category, blue elderberry, red osier dogwood, serviceberry, salmonberry, and then ground covers are miner's lettuce, wood strawberry, red columbine, wood sorrel, and sloe sedge, which I find really interesting. Sometimes it's the unexpected ones that I most love. And then when what we share in our program is that idea that like what you really want to aim for are blooms throughout spring, summer, and fall. Again, I'm guessing you all may already know some of this, but these are some of our top picks for spring plants. got big leaf lupin, red flowering currant, farewell to spring, self-heal, California poppy, bluehead gilia, and camas. And then for summer, we've got Douglas spirea, showy fleabane, western columbine, meadow checker mallow, and snowberry. And then in the fall, of course, we've got pearly everlasting, goldenrod, Douglas aster, harebell, and yarrow are some favorites. So some habitat projects you can work on for pollinators are replacing some aspects of your yard with something that would be more beneficial. So for example, a lot of folks throughout the Willamette Valley really struggle with blackberry, and some great alternatives for replacement of blackberry are chokecherry roses, our native roses, of which we have multiple varieties, as well as hawthorn, our native hawthorn. For English laurel, a lot of people use English laurel as kind of a privacy screening from their neighbors. And we have found that serviceberry can be a really great, a row of serviceberry can be a really good replacement. Their blooms are very beneficial for pollinators, and they grow really densely together. So even though it's not evergreen, it grows densely enough together that you still get that like visual barrier. And then for folks who are removing ivy, knick-knick is a really great replacement, can handle a lot of the same conditions, but is better for wildlife. And then of course, butterfly bush, a great replacement for that is Douglas spirea, which I've planted and the bees just love it. So I can speak from personal experience on that one. Another habitat element we talk about are native shrub hedgerows, which is just a fancy way of saying lining up multiple species of native shrubs in a row to create a really dense kind of lineup or thicket of native shrubs. These are fantastic for pollinators and they're fantastic for birds. This is especially great for bird nesting. They really love, they get a lot of privacy, they get a lot of safety and security from these hedgerows. And for pollinators, it's really great because they don't have to zoom from one part of the yard to the other to get their food. They can just work their way on down through the hedgerow and don't have to exert so much energy to get from one food source to the next. There are a lot of native plants that you can grow from hardwood cuttings, which I really recommend. It's super fun to do and also, of course, saves money. We've got willows that are pretty easy to propagate, Douglas spirea, red osier dogwood, black twinberry, and Pacific ninebark. This is a good time to give a plug for our resource library on the Backyard Habitat website. We have about 300 plus different handouts and resources with a search. There's a search ability to search, so you can type in a specific topic that you're interested in, and it will pull up resources for you. And if you're ever looking for something and can't find it in the resource library, let us know because we have other resources that we haven't added. But that's a great place to go to look for things like how do I propagate? Okay, so kind of switching away from talking about native plants and more specifically to building habitat for pollinators, some of the top things you can do are planting varied bloom times throughout the season, which we kind of talked about. This handout right here by West Multnomah Soil and Water Conservation District, Pollinator Plants in Bloom Periods is the name of it, is a really great handout because it gives you a whole lineup of plants that you can plant to ensure blooms throughout all the seasons. A lot of bees, 70% of native bees are ground nesters, and so it's really important to leave some spots of bare ground in your yard. And so this is where you kind of have to find the balance. We also recommend using like chip drop and other forms of thick bark mulch to really over time break down and improve soil health. But it is really important to also make sure you're leaving some bare areas where there's not mulch or really thick compost so that bees can utilize those areas, because that's how they need kind of some loose soil to dig into to nest. They also love warm places to dry and warm up in the morning. So piles of rocks, small rocks or larger rocks, are really beneficial for them, especially if it's by your water source, and then especially if it's also by your blooms, like your plants that are blooming that you want to attract them to. And so over here on the right, you can see this little guy, single solo guy coming out of his hole. And this photo down here is what I would call a neighborhood of pollinators, bees probably. They form these little, this is like a space with lots of little yellow mounds where each of these is a home. So it's like a little neighborhood. Another thing we really recommend is planting ground covers and shrubs that have hollow stems in the winter, because hollow stems are what a lot of pollinators lay their eggs in. And that's where their young grow up and go through their phases until they emerge in the spring. And so this is where it's really important to try to leave as many pithy stems like blooms. Maybe you have like aster, goldenrod, pearly everlasting. And some folks are tempted to kind of cut all that down in the fall to make their yard look tidy and clean. But really for pollinator health, it's really helpful to leave all of that up, because the pollinators will definitely take advantage of that. Okay, so now kind of switching from pollinators specifically to more broad wildlife stewardship, because what we know is that pollinator species rely on other species as well, and birds rely on pollinators. So it's important to use that lens of like ecosystem health. And so that's the idea here. So these are some of the regular things that we recommend. We talked about water features already, but one thing I'll mention with that specifically related to pollinators is that what they're going to need is a really shallow pan, something really shallow with water in it, and then stones in there so that they have a place to stand as they kind of dip in to drink. Nothing too deep or nothing where they could fully submerge. And so I like to have a few different things in my yard, one that's like really shallow with pebbles in it for the pollinators, a deeper one that's for the birds, and a few different ones scattered around. Bird and bat nest boxes are very helpful. We've got insect nesting habitat here, and the way that we talk about that is just thinking about it as like anything that you prune in your yard, anything that isn't going to like contribute to a future problem like blackberry canes or something like that. But most of the things that you prune in your yard, whether it's from a tree or a shrub, can be used to create little piles that will, as they decompose, will create really great nesting habitat, both for pollinators and other insects, as well as for birds. And so trying to think of like, what things am I cleaning up? What things am I removing by pruning and so forth that I can keep, and that insects and others can really benefit from here. So just kind of trying to think through the materials that kind of come out of your yard and how you can keep them there to benefit those who lean on it. Snags and nurse logs. We talk a lot about snags, which are basically standing dead trees like this guy right here. And then nurse logs are similar. They're also dead trees, but they've fallen, so they're laying on the ground. And they're really beneficial both for pollinators, or I'm sorry, both for woodpeckers, species of woodpeckers that come in and will build their cavity nests, as well as the birds that come along and use that same nest in future years. But they're also really great for pollinators and other beneficial insects, because as that wood, as the tree kind of decomposes and that wood softens, there are a lot of insects that will that will utilize that for their home, including our local mason bee and other bee species. So try to keep around as much of that as you can. We're really lacking in that, especially in our urban and suburban areas. We talk about reduced outdoor lighting so that migrating birds and local species can benefit from a dark sky because a bright sky is very difficult for them. And reducing window collisions by putting up stickers or getting pens where you can like draw things on the window. Of course, native pollinator meadows like this are fantastic for pollinators. And then we also talk about keeping cats indoors or in enclosures because a significant percentage of bird deaths are from cats outside. Okay, we talked a little bit about this, the water for pollinators. Did I miss anything? We have a specific kind of recommendation of 1/2 inch to 1 inch. And then making sure to clean the water out regularly. Mason bees are a super fun way, especially if you have kids at home. These bees are so friendly, and so you can get really up close to them and they're not going to care. They're super friendly, they're not going to sting, and they're a ton of fun to keep around. They do require some care, so if you have been thinking about getting mason bees or are interested in learning more, we have some great information, again, in that resource library on our website. Brush piles are another thing that we really recommend, and this is something you wouldn't want to have too close to your home. Somewhere kind of in the corner of your lot would be good, but these are really critical for birds who hang out on the ground and who do their foraging on the ground, who do their nesting on the ground, such as towies and some sparrows. They have a really hard time finding places on the ground to nest in our urban and suburban areas. So the more of these types of piles we can have around, the more those birds will be successful. We've talked about snags and nurse logs. I wanted to point out some of these images, which I think are really helpful. These are different ideas of what you can do with any trees that do come down. I had a very old plum tree that fell this summer unexpectedly, and I'm doing something very similar to this, where I have a bit of a slope. And so I'm using it to kind of buffer the slope and slow down erosion and slow down the flow of water down the slope. And it's really, I can already tell from the recent heavy rains that it's making a big difference. It also just makes for really pretty borders between like planting beds and pathways or things like that. Let's see here. Removing lawns. I'm guessing you all are on the same page here, but we do recommend to folks that if they do want to remove lawns to use like sheet mulching methods or other methods and convert over to native plantings or pollinator meadows. We also like to share information about stormwater and soil management, and these are the list of menu items that we recommend to our participants, and they get to choose which ones they're interested in. And when they get the site visit, it's really helpful for the technician to be there to look at their site with them, because a lot of folks are maybe new to gardening, maybe this is their first home, and they are kind of unfamiliar with some of these things. And so it's great to have someone to kind of think through, like, should I disconnect my downspout, or is that a bad idea for my property? Or where to put a rain garden, things like that. But all of these are going to help retain rainfall on your property, in your yard. And that is really, really beneficial, both from a keeping our rivers clean perspective, as well as soil health, the health of your soil, as well as pollinator health, because even when pollinators are ground nesters, they need access to water. And a lot of them actually like mud, like the mason bees. They're called mason bees because they utilize mud. So they need some muddy areas. So keeping water, as much water as you can on your site, assuming you have good drainage. And so a lot of this does revolve around getting to know your site really well and how well water drains or doesn't. But all of these are good ones to consider, at least. So a lot of this has to do with working less and building more. So instead of taking down large trees, keeping them as much as possible, or if they're dying back, having an arborist come out and turn it into a snag so that it can remain standing, but the weight is removed so that you don't have to worry about it falling over. Or leaving your leaves. This is a picture of one of our ground foragers who likes to just flick around leaves. And on the underside of the leaves are insect larvae that they eat. And so they'll eat it, they'll feed it to their young. So leaves on the ground are really, really critical for bird health and also for those insect populations that do lay their eggs on the underside of the leaves. Disconnecting downspouts, great way to manage stormwater, and then letting lawns go dormant instead of watering them, or even better, replacing lawns with any type of shrub or ground cover or native grass. Rain gardens, I'm going to skip this one, I think, because I feel like I'm getting close to time. We talk a lot about integrated pest management. I'm not sure if this is something that you might have already covered, but it's essentially a way of saying before you go to Home Depot or another store and buy a spray to use on insects, think about steps to like ensure that what you're doing is what you actually want to do, and that the intentions and that the results won't kind of backfire with what your goals are. So instead of buying something right away, stopping, waiting to learn more, identifying the pest, the thing that you're identifying as a pest, and thinking about whether it's something you can actually live with or not. And so just being more mindful and thinking through making sure you know what it is that you're going after, and that you really have to use a product. And if you do have to use a product, running it by growsmartgrowsafe.org, which is a great website where you can look up either the product name or the main ingredient of the product and get information on the different toxicity levels. So you can really get a good gauge on how toxic the product is that you're thinking about using. So some really great other ideas for sustainably doing some of these projects. Again, using things you already have on site. Wood, branch piles. There are a lot of online resources for getting free resources like Chip Drop, Craigslist, plant swaps, growing plants from seed or propagating from cuttings. And then this has become, I think, fairly common knowledge in our area, which is planting in the fall versus in the spring, because then the plants have all winter to get really rooted in before they have to try to survive the summer heat. Okay, and that brings us to questions and answers. So hopefully there was some information in there that was new and beneficial. It can never hurt, I think, to hear things multiple times anyways. I know for me, sometimes I hear it once and I'm like, yeah, maybe. And then I hear it a second time, I'm like, yeah, actually, that is a good idea. So hopefully if there was some repetition, it helps kind of think through next steps.
Oh, awesome. We do have a question in the chat from Mary Jo. She says that she has a bird feeder that the birds avoid, and she's wondering if there might be a reason why or what could cause that.
Interesting. It might have something to do with location. a lot of bird species definitely prefer calmer areas. And so you might want to look and see if it's close to a road, they're probably not going to like that. Um, it is possible that they've learned that there's a danger nearby. Maybe the feeder gets ransacked by squirrels, or I don't feel like birds usually see squirrels as danger, but maybe cats or raccoons are nearby. Um, in my experience, that knowledge doesn't get retained for very long in birds' brains, but they could over time learn that over a season. Um, It might, yeah, it's a good question. Definitely seed can go bad really quickly during certain times of the year. And so I would keep a really close eye on the seed to make sure it's not getting wet, to make
Mm.
sure it's not going bad. Just like having a water feature and needing to clean it weekly, I feel like with bird seed, you definitely want to keep an eye on it. If it doesn't have a cover, that might be causing mold or other things that the birds are averse to. So definitely check and make sure it has a cover to make sure that the seed isn't getting wet. Um, yeah, it can be hard to tell. If you have a photo you can share, maybe try to drop that because it can be hard to tell unless you're like at the site and can see all um, the potential environmental things going on nearby.
We also have a question in the chat from Liz on, could you please elaborate on removing downspouts? The water has to go somewhere.
Oh. It does. Yes, you want to make sure it goes somewhere away from your home. Disconnecting downspouts. I would say the first thing you want to think about before you do that is doing a little personal soil test. If you learning a little bit about your soil and how well water percolates through it is a good idea. And a kind of easy way to do that is to just go out on a day when there's been enough rain that you've got a little bit of mud out by near where your downspout is. And just kind of scoop it up and play around with it and mold it. And if it's really moldable and it sticks together in a really solid ball, then you've got a lot of clay in your soil. And that means that you're probably not going to get super great drainage there. Um, as opposed to like if you try to form a ball and it just kind of crumbles, then you've got more sand and loam in your soil. And so just be mindful of what the soil's like near your downspout before you disconnect it. And then so disconnecting, and not everybody has downspouts that they can disconnect. And so this is kind of a hard thing to answer because I can't see your downspout to know whether you can actually even do it or not. In some areas where homes were built more recently, like in the 80s or 90s or even earlier, you don't really have downspouts you can disconnect. They're kind of connected into a system. So for example, in Washington County, we don't often recommend disconnecting downspouts because ideally everyone's rainwater is going down their downspouts into underground pipes that take that water back into the Tualatin River because the Tualatin River is
Mm.
only fed by water being recirculated like that. It doesn't get any snow melt the way that the east side, um, the way that like um, the way that our water on the east side of the Willamette River does. But if you have a type of downspout where you can see the components and you can see the components above ground, what you can do is basically pull the piece up out of the drain. And then I recommend getting an extension. You can go to hardware stores and find these like extensions to like run the water away from your home. And then what I like to do and what I recommend is running that water away from your home so that the water is either flowing into a like a rain garden, which is basically kind of like a small pond, if you will, but it's planted up with a lot of native plants that absorb a lot of water. And side note that there's a really fantastic workshop hosted by East Multnomah Soil Water Conservation District on how to create a rain garden that I highly recommend if you're thinking about that. So running the water away from your home into a rain garden or into like a planting bed, and then from there, assuming that it can then, like, any overage that doesn't get absorbed into the soil there can then overflow into the sidewalk and the street, which is not ideal, but is better than having a pool near your home. So again, stormwater disconnection is a bit tricky. It depends on where you live, how old your home is, what your soil type is. And so I would definitely try to do a little more research. Sometimes cities have stormwater management departments or other agencies that can answer that. So, but it is really beneficial to do if you can.
Awesome. Well, I want to first of all say a really big thank you to Susie, who is spending her time this evening with us and giving us this wonderful presentation. I know I really appreciated all the information on which plants can be grown from hardwood stakes and thinking about things from the perspective of what you don't have to do, not just what you should do. And that's really useful. In case this is your first experience with the Oregon State Bee Stewards, we are a program that's intended to be a self-paced course. And so if you're interested in building habitat and learning more about bees, our course includes online modules and quizzes to help you learn, as well as events like this. And you can find us on the OSU Extension website. So thank you so much, Susie.
Thank you for reaching out, Emily, and inviting me. I appreciate it.